So let's do Pandora's Promise, which is a What did you say like that?
Well, I had Utopia ready to go now.
We'll do that in a minute. Okay, so Pandora's Promise is a documentary about the environmental argument for nuclear power. One of the things about it's very hard to concentrate when you're doing that.
Ignore. I'm just holding up a piece of paper.
But you're doing it, as somebody said, in the manner of somebody who's doing round 6 in a boxing ring. Okay, so one of the things that documentaries should do. Can you please put it down now? One of the things that documentaries should do is to is to challenge your preconceptions of things, to talk about things that you thought you knew about and doesn't. And in the case of this documentary, so it sets out with a bunch of people who were environmental campaigners, or many of whom were very, very anti-nuclear in the past. And the documentary is essentially saying, look, if you're going to be an environmental campaigner and if what you're worrying about is fossil fuels and carbon emissions and all that sort of stuff, then in fact what you need to do is you need to start looking at nuclear power in a different way. And the documentary goes back to the history of nuclear power and makes a very well argued, and I'm saying obviously the way people respond to this is perfectly up to them, but it makes a very well argued case for the paranoia about nuclear energy being tied up with nuclear weapons. And what it says is if you actually look at the statistical history of the dangers or the waste or whatever it is involved in the nuclear industry, and you compare them with what's happened with other sources of energy, in fact, it's at the safer end of the spectrum. It's actually much less risky. It's much less polluting. It's essentially overturning all the things which those of us of a certain age who, remember Nuclear Nine Danker, which
nuclear power, ja bitte, is what you're now saying, is that?
No, I'm not saying it. I'm telling you this is what the documentary says.
The documentary, obviously, we don't express opinions.
No, but I'm not expressing an opinion. What I'm saying is I think it was a documentary which raised all these questions and specifically had these questions raised by people who described themselves as environmental campaigners, and one of the central voices in it, this guy says, look, this is one of the tenets of my being an environmental campaigner was I was anti-nuclear. That was what I am. That's what it is. It's like, this is what you are. And he said, actually, I realised that the reason I wasn't, I was changing my position was, in fact, it was all to do with fear. It was all to do with paranoia. It was all to do with ideas that had been forwarded to some extent by Hollywood. And they have a clip from the China Syndrome, and then they have a clip of Jane Fonda talking about the China Syndrome, and then they cut to, you remember the China Syndrome?
Yep.
So the central thing of the China Syndrome is that you have a meltdown, and the meltdown is so catastrophic that the reactor goes through the centre of the Earth and comes out in China. And as one of the scientists said, well, it doesn't matter. For one thing, it wouldn't come out in China anyway, but secondly, it's all nonsense. In fact, this is all just inspired. So what I would say was it's an interesting contrary position that is particularly interesting because it's largely argued by people who come from the position of having been in the past very, very much invested in the idea of, anti-nuclear is part of the doctrine. Anti-nuclear is part. And one of the things they do is there's a lot of stuff about Chernobyl. And of course, you remember the Chernobyl diaries recently. And it's looking at, actually what the no pun intended, what the fallout of Chernobyl genuinely is. There's one moment in it, I have to say, in which they're talking about a particular form of reactor, and there's a guy who seems like a very trustworthy scientist, and he's explaining why all those ideas about the terrible things that can happen with nuclear reactors don't apply in the way that nuclear reactors are now being built. And he's saying, well, it works like this, and it recycles this, and it does this, and it's very clean, and it's completely self-contained, and all those things. Actually, what you're talking about is a different form of reactor that was made for commercial reasons, and there were problems with it, but it's this, and then the director says, so this is safe. It's not. He says, yes, this reactor cannot melt down, and there is a thing whenever you see anybody saying this reactor cannot melt down.
HMS Titanic.
No, I know, exactly. And so there's immediately a part of you which hears all those kind of Westworld things about, in which nothing can go wrong. But it was grippingly argued, and I think it raises the questions interestingly.